want to tell you about our journey to Africa. We now live in a little tiny country called Eswatini, but it was formerly called Swaziland. When the king turned 50, he changed the name of the country. So we're located, if you look at a map, we're in the very bottom corner within the boundaries of South Africa. There are two small countries that look like islands. One is Lesotho and one is Eswatini. We're a tiny little country. We have a population of maybe 1 million people. We have a king, so he is the absolute monarch here, and he has absolute authority over government and parliament. And he's actually the last absolute king on the continent of Africa, which gives him a very distinct history, I guess you would call it. Well, there's many challenges here, and we face many challenges here. We have the highest HIV rate in the world, and it's been that way since about 2003. Layer in that tuberculosis. Yes, that's still a thing here. I know we don't deal with it much in Canada or the US, but we deal with TB all the time here. And they say that HIV and TB are best friends. So long before COVID-19 came along, we were dealing with two major health issues, including a pandemic. On top of that, we have what's called orphan-headed households here. So because of the HIV pandemic and because of poverty, we've lost a whole generation of people. So let me sort of explain how that worked. It's a polygamous country, and so we have a lot of men who maybe, let's say they had 6 wives, and so they live in a homestead. So here's the men and here's their 6 houses. And let's say each of those women have 6 children. And they might have 9 children, they might have 3 children, but there's a very high infant mortality rate as well. So that man has 6 wives. Let's say there's 36 children there, and then that man goes off to South Africa to go to work, or he goes and gets a job somewhere. And he comes back on his annual break, and he has sex with his wives, and they all get HIV. Then the man goes back to work again, and he may never come back, and the wives all eventually die. That leaves 36 orphans. We don't have villages here like so many other African countries. So when you hear it takes a village to raise a child, if we were in Malawi or Kenya or somewhere like that, the village would absorb those children. But because of we have a homestead system here, we now have 36 children without parents. So more than half of our total population are what's called OVCs, or orphans and vulnerable children. In a country of 1 million people, the size of New Jersey, we have more than 15,000 orphan-headed households. That's not a word that we would ever use in the West. What's an orphan-headed household? Well, just in the newspaper yesterday, there was an article that said that the youngest orphan-headed household in the country, the household is headed by a 7-year-old. So the parents have died, and they've left these children. The 7-year-old is the oldest person there, caring for 2 younger siblings. That's just not something we hear about anywhere else. And so that's been one of the challenges that this country has faced. And so all of a sudden, when we talk about orphans and vulnerable children, that 7-year-old that I just talked about is very vulnerable, because how is she going to eat, or how is he going to eat? How is he going to provide food for the family? So that child then has to go down the road, try to find someone who's going to provide food for them. And food is very scarce here, so there is no food. So if they're going to go get a loaf of bread, that child is probably going to have sex for that loaf of bread. The child is very vulnerable. So that is really one of the reasons why this children's home exists, why we have a home for abandoned babies, why the laundry you see behind me, we wash 600 pieces of clothing every single day. We change 500 diapers a day because of the situation I've just told you about. When children come to us, they're placed with us through social welfare and through the government. So people can't just drop off babies at the front gate. They have to be placed with us. And we are the parents of more than 300 children right now. So the situation is complicated. And with all of these young girls getting pregnant and all of these young girls having nowhere to go, they don't have someone to talk to, they don't have a hospital to go to, because the government hospitals are out of money. The government hospitals have no medicine. So imagine, even as an older person, you have hypertension and you need medication and you go to the hospital, there is none. I have many of my staff who need very important surgery, whether it's gynecological or otherwise, and there's no anesthetic in the country. So when you go to the hospital, you might just be given something like aspirin for whatever your situation is. And it's dire. It's just a very dire situation. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about one child, one story that might move your heart. And this little child, I'm going to call her Barbara for today's conversation. Barbara was born in the dead of night to a teenage mom, very similar to what the other women I've been telling you about. This 15-year-old mom already had a child who was severely disabled with cerebral palsy. And so in the dead of night, she feels the baby coming, and she'd already told the father that she was pregnant, and the father just threw her away. He said, "It's not my child." So she was hopeless, she was desperate, didn't know what to do. So she went out to the pit latrine, or the outhouse that night. She felt the baby coming, and she gave birth to baby Barbara into the pit latrine. Down she goes into a decade of human waste, if we can imagine. I mean, it's hard to even get our heads around that. And this baby lies there, and the mother goes back to bed, and she's crying, she's sobbing, she feels terrible for what she's done, but to her, that was her only option. For her, she had no other choice. A few hours later, like 5 hours later, she went back to the pit latrine just to make sure the baby was dead, and she heard the baby crying. Barbara was alive. The mother started to panic because the sun was starting to come up, and so she went and got hot coals from the fire. She brought them over and she dumped them down into that pit latrine and started to burn the baby. And the baby cried louder. Her uncle heard a commotion, wanted to see what was going on, so he ran to the pit latrine and found this young mother, asked her what she'd done, and she told him, "There's the baby at the bottom of the pit latrine, on fire." So he quickly ran and got a shovel, and he shoveled dirt on top of baby Barbara and put the fire out. They called the police. The police came. They actually tied a rope around the mother's waist, and they sent the mother down into the toilet to get the baby. The baby came out and was very badly burned. Her face was burned, her nose was burned. She ended up losing a couple of toes and fingers. It was a horrific situation, and they took the mother and the baby to the hospital. Now, the hospitals here, when a mother goes into the hospital, or if a child goes into the hospital, the mother has to go with them because the nurses aren't able to care for children. So there always has to be a family member with them. So here's this young mother who's just tried to kill her baby, and she's the one caring for the child in a government hospital that only has aspirin for pain. And this child that has third-degree burns on much of her body. And the mother had to bring her disabled child because there was no one else to care for her. That's the type of situation where children come to us. It's hopelessness. You know, this isn't a cruel mother. This isn't someone who was trying to be insensitive or just angry, or she was hopeless. She had nowhere else to go. She had nowhere else to turn. Well, after about 6 weeks, the baby lived. Barbara was alive. And they then sent the mother and the 2 children to prison. Also here, when a mother goes to prison, if you have a child under 2 years, that child goes to prison with the mother. And so there they are, they're in prison. And I get a phone call saying, "Can you come and pick up this baby? We need to place this baby with you so that she can be in a place of safety." I went and picked up Barbara and brought her home. And from that day, her journey started. Her journey to what is life going to look like for her. And we brought her into where our small babies are, where we have babies that are 1 day old to 6 months old. And that baby, Barbara started to get lung infections, and food started to go in, because when she would eat, the food would go down, the formula would go down into her lungs, and she would suffocate. So she ended up in the hospital over and over and over again because of this situation. So we ended up having to take her to the United States. Our friends at Global Medical Relief Fund helped us, and she has been there twice now to get surgery. But now she's trying to find her identity. And she's now 6 years old. She's happy, she's healthy, she has a beautiful smile, and her nose has been fixed. She's still missing a finger and a toe. But despite all of that heartache, the mother is still in contact with us. The mother was in prison for years. She's still awaiting her trial, in fact. But she knew what she did was wrong, and she repented. And she would reach out to me. I was the only person who would take her call. And she would call maybe once a month and just say, "How is the baby? How is my child? How is she doing?" And I was able to go and visit her a couple of times. I was able to minister to her, and she was truly, truly sorry for what she had done. And she's been given the opportunity to see baby Barbara. You know, she was a little tiny baby, so she was able to apologize. But we were able to talk together, and I was able to offer forgiveness to her. And now she's out of prison, and now she's actually traveling around the country talking to young girls about pregnancy and hopelessness. But imagine getting to a place in your life that you're that hopeless, that there's nothing else you can do and there's nowhere else to turn. And that's what this place is about. That's what our home for abandoned babies is about. Is trying to reach those young girls before they feel they have to dump the baby in a pit latrine. We have a baby who was dumped in a river. We have babies who are put in plastic bags and hung in trees because they don't know what else to do. And there's social welfare, but it's not like it is in other countries where they can go and explain their situation, say I need help, and get help in advance. So what we try to do is be a home for those orphaned and abandoned children that are under the age of 2 years, that they can come here, and honestly, we love them back to life. That's what our job is, to love them back to life. When they come in under 2 years, they might have tuberculosis. We have lots of children with HIV and AIDS. We've had 35 or 40 children come to us who've come from the bottom of a pit latrine, and they have burns, they have lung infections. One little boy had a massive hematoma on the back of his head because the pit latrine hadn't been used yet and it was just rock. So that's that, because we took that first step in a journey of faith, and then the second step and the third step, we are able to serve God in a way that we never would have imagined, never were able to do from a marketing company. But we can manage an organization and manage a team of people and medical professionals so that they can help these children and give them a future. And these children will grow up and they will know who they are in Christ. And imagine what little Barbara will do when she gets older. Imagine what her life story will be. Maybe she'll be the police officer who's helping, or maybe she'll be the one who's helping us love other children back to life. Imagine the possibilities.